Hello and welcome to My Way or the AI Way. I'm Scott Davison. I'm on a mission to master AI. And so far on this journey, I've covered most of the main use cases for AI in life and in business, including content, research, analysis, strategy, and even vibe coding. For me, the final frontier is to look at this area of automations and AI agents, and that's what I'm going to be covering today. So in this episode, I'll give you an overview of AI agents, how they're set up, what they can be used for and how they may fit into your business. And I'll also show you a demo of an agent I've been able to build using a product called N8N. And I'll share some of the things I've learnt in that process. So if you're curious about agents and wondering how they can be used in your business, this is the episode for you. Okay, so I've got some slides here that I'm going to talk to, but if you're listening to the audio version, no problem. You'll be able to follow along. This was just to keep me on track, and I prepared these with the help of Gamma. I guess the first point is that now is a really good time to be looking at agents, in my opinion, because we're kind of moving from that early adopter phase where a lot of the tech is still getting fleshed out. And it's sort of at that point where it's almost crossing the chasm. I think for a lot of big businesses, they've been using automations and even agents for a while now. But for most small businesses, I think that transition is going to be happening next year, 2026. So now is a really good time to be looking for it. There's often some advantages of being in that sort of early majority rather than the really early adopters, because a lot of the technical tools have sort of matured a bit and you can really learn from what others have done. And there have been some advancements recently and some announcements from OpenAI, which I think indicates that it's really moving into that early majority phase where it's going to become a lot more accessible to the average small business. So now's a really good time to be looking at this. And there are a number of tools available that are quite well-established tools that can be used for automations. And most of these can now be used to build agents as well. And I'll explain the difference between a traditional automation and a agentic automation or an agent. But Zapier is a tool that's been around for a long time. A lot of businesses have been using that. It's got lots of integrations, and that's been a really successful tool in terms of building automations. Make.com is another tool that's quite well known for building automations and agents. And the one that's really seems to be popular at the moment, and the one I've been playing around with this week, is a tool called N8N. And again, that's a sort of drag and drop visual type builder for automations, and you can now plug in agentic capabilities to that as well. So I'll give you a demonstration of N8N, but just be aware there are a lot of tools out there. These are some of the main ones. And the other big announcement, which I mentioned, which I think is really interesting, is that OpenAI have recently added an agent builder to their offering. It's not part of ChatGPT yet. It's a separate developer tool, and it's very much in the beta stage, but they're now going into this space. They're basically going into every space at the moment, OpenAI, but they're building a product that's very similar to Zapier or N8. So you'll soon be able to build agents within ChatGPT. And I think that's when it's really going to become even more accessible to more people. But yeah, that's the landscape at the moment. So just be aware that some of those tools are out there. And in terms of sort of what is an agent, what's an automation, there's really three different levels. You've got your basic LLMs like ChatGPT, Gemini, and this is where you just ask a question and you get a simple answer back. Think of it like a chat bot. And obviously they've been adding more features as well, but you then have a automated workflow. This is where you've got fixed steps, probably integrating with other tools, but it's very much okay, do this, then do that, then do that. It's a linear workflow. And that's what Zapier has been used for a long time now. And then the third level is when it becomes an agent or perhaps an agentic workflow, but that's where you're giving it a goal rather than step-by-step instructions, and you're giving it a bit more autonomy to decide the best way to achieve that goal. And this obviously aligns with the agentic future that we're all hearing about. I've seen a lot of people debating about whether something is an agent or whether it's an automation. It doesn't really matter, in my opinion. They're all automations. They just have different levels of autonomy. And the more autonomy you have, the closer to being a true agent, I guess it is. But basically, if you can give it a task and allow it to choose how to achieve that task, then you're really into the area of an agent at that point. And then just finally, before I get into my demo, I guess the anatomy of an agent. So what makes an agent? There's really 5 parts that can make up a agent. The first is what they call the brain. So this is the AI model. So one of the LLMs, it could be ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude, but that's what gives it sort of the intelligence and the ability to reason. Secondly, a really important part of agents is you need to give them access to tools in order for them to do things. If you think of a human or an employee, they have their brain, which is their experience, but they also have the ability to use tools to get the job done. So you're giving an agent access to tools via integrations. The third key element is it needs to have memory and context, obviously so that it can remember the steps of the task, but more importantly, agents over time, they're learning like a human. They're improving as they go. So that's a really important part of this agentic model, is that it can improve itself as it goes. The fourth element, which is really important as you start to give more autonomy to these agents, is to build in guardrails. So these could be very programmed in constraints or rules around what it can and can't do. But you may also, or in fact, you probably do want to at first still have a human in the loop. So maybe the agent gets it to a certain point and then it checks with a human before it moves to the next stage. But having guardrails in place is really important part of building agents. And the final element, the fifth element, is called orchestration. And this is really the logic of how everything fits together, how all the different parts plug together, as well as the overriding methodologies, the monitoring, error logging, things like that. So that's a high-level overview of the anatomy of an agent. Where would a business be looking to use agents or automations? Basically, you're looking for any repeatable tasks that you're doing regularly, and often a good place to start is to think about the tasks that make you roll your eyes, the things you'd rather not be doing. If you can automate those, that's good for everyone. So some examples of where automations and agents are typically being used: in the sales team, using it for lead management, capturing leads, managing follow-ups, booking appointments. Marketing, obviously, you can be using agents to draft content, to schedule social media posts, even to take content and repurpose it. You might have different agents doing each of that. And then in other areas, operations and admin, one of the most common uses is just automated meeting notes that then feed straight into people's tasks or maybe into Slack. Invoice extraction within the finance team, this used to be a very manual task to sort of go in, open invoices, get all the invoice numbers out. With image recognition, a lot of that can be automated now. And even travel planning is a good example where you might have an agent who can help you with travel reservations, flights, etc. So as I say, you're really looking for repeatable, let's say low value, repetitive tasks is a good place to start. And it's good to start with the low risk ones, particularly at the moment where things are still evolving. If you can pick low risk tasks, that makes it easier to innovate quickly as well. Okay, so that's a quick overview of agents. And I wanted to roll my sleeves up and try building one of these myself. So I'm going to run you through what I've built today using a product called N8N. And I was looking at different simple sort of agents that I could build. There are a lot of examples out there, but I thought if I'm going to do it, I want to do something that I'll actually use. And one thing I'm starting to do a lot more recently is getting out there doing networking the old traditional way. And I go along to these events and people give me their business cards and then, they end up in my pocket and I never follow up or I don't take notes. I thought what I'll try and build is just a simple way of me taking a photo of that business card, logging it on Google Drive and putting it into a spreadsheet so I can follow up those leads. So that was the concept. I sort of fleshed out the idea a bit with ChatGPT. It seemed like a pretty simple automation to start with. And obviously there's lots of scope to then add more features to that down the track. So let me show you what that looks like in N8N, how it all fits together and an example of how it works. And then I'll share some of the things I've learned in that process. Okay, so this is an example of a workflow that I've set up in N8N. And this is the first tool I've used, but I imagine Make.com and Zapier work in a very similar way where you have these different nodes and you can visualize how they all fit together. And these workflows can get much more complex. This is a very linear one, as you can see, from left to right. So I'll zoom in a bit here. So you start with a trigger. So in my case, I wanted a way to be able to send a photo of a business card with some notes that I type in. And the integration they have that they recommend for that is Telegram. It's an app, a messaging app. You could use WhatsApp. You can integrate it with WhatsApp as well, but I thought I'll just use Telegram for this purpose. I can send audio or text messages via Telegram. So that's the trigger. Once it arrives, it then looks to see if there's a business card image attached, which is this if step in the flow. It then grabs that file that it is attached, and this is where I plug it into ChatGPT. So I had to integrate it with ChatGPT. You need to use credits. It's different from your normal license. I'm just using the free version of N8N here, and that also includes a small number of free tokens to get you started. So I'm still within the free area of N8N, and that's how I plugged it into ChatGPT. So ChatGPT looks at the image and uses its image analysis capabilities to see what's written on the business card. There's then another prompt within ChatGPT, which converts what's on the business card into fields, business name, email address, etc. It uploads the image to Google Drive. So I've got a photo of all these business cards stored. I don't need to store the physical ones. I've got them all stored on Google Drive, which I thought would be helpful. And then it feeds it into a spreadsheet, a Google Sheet I've created, where I'm storing all these contacts that I've met in these networking events. And then the final step, which it suggested adding, which I thought I would, is it sends a text message back to me to confirm that it's received it and uploaded that file. So as I say, that's a pretty simple workflow just from left to right. There's not too many different if this, then that type variations, but you can see just counting the main nodes here, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different nodes, and each one of those required configuring, hooking into Google Drive or Google Sheets, entering API codes. So it definitely took a lot longer than I was expecting, and it was a lot more technical than I was expecting. You can see here, I had to actually add in some code. This is JavaScript code here and here at 2 of the steps. And that was really troubleshooting. I would try things that wasn't working when I went into either ChatGPT or the AI assistance that it provides within N8N. It would often, I didn't have to write the JavaScript code. It would tell me what the JavaScript code was. It would write it for me, and then I would copy and paste that into these nodes to fix a few of the problems that were occurring. That's what I mean when I say it's still reasonably technical. You don't have to be a coder, but you have to be comfortable sort of looking at code, copying and pasting it in, setting up all these different integrations. But I got it working. Okay, so let me show you how this works. I'm at a networking event. I get a business card. Rather than just putting it in my pocket and forgetting what to do with it while it's still fresh, I can take a photo of that business card. I then go to the Telegram app and I can send that to my agent, and I can add a note to it. I've met this person today. I'm going to speak to them next week about so-and-so. And then I send that off to the agent. Now, if I execute this workflow, you'll be able to see how this works from the agent point of view. So here we go. And you can see it's reading the text. It's moving along to the next step where it's extracting the data. It's now uploading that file to Google Drive, combining some of the data, putting it into a new row in Google Sheets, and it's sent a text message back to me. And I've received a text message saying, yep, save to contacts, here's the details. So I know it's gone through. And if I go now to Google Drive, you can see that that business card has been saved here, which is great. I've got it for future reference. And if we go and look at my Google Sheet, yes, there's a new row added here with the details, which in this case is mine because I used an old business card of mine, but it's added all the notes there, and it puts a link here to the original image if I need to go and see the original business card. So that's how that workflow works within N8N. Quite a simple use case. There's take a photo, upload it to Google Drive, and add the details to Google Sheets. But it did take quite a while to set that up, I have to say. It was probably 4 or 5 hours in total that I spent. Most of that was troubleshooting. A lot of it was also integrating the different tools, because each time I wanted to add Google Drive, there was a process for that and an API key. Had to go and get permissions from the Google account. Now, these are probably things that would only be the first time you integrate, but still that each time you're integrating a tool, there's quite a bit of work there. So you've got to make sure you're the admin user for all those, or you're going to be constantly requesting permissions. And as I say, there was also a bit of troubleshooting involved where errors occurring. I went into ChatGPT, troubleshooted it, got the JavaScript code, pasted that in. So quite a long process. the return on investment for this particular one, I'm going to have to upload a lot of business cards to recoup that time. But the investment for me in this case was learning how the process works. So I'm really glad I spent the time to do that. I now have a much better understanding of how these agents work. But in terms of a cost versus return equation, you really need to be doing a task that you're going to be saving time on, a lot of time going forward, to justify the upfront time to build it and to test it. But obviously, the bigger your organization and the more people using the agent, the quicker the value equation adds up. So a couple more points on N8N. As I mentioned, it is still a reasonably technical product. Obviously, it's been set up as a visual drag and drop type editor, which is great. But even the way they position it is flexible AI workflow automation for technical teams. So it is intended to be used by a technical user, but it's an easier way of building these. I mentioned integrations. One of the advantages of using a product like this is that they have a lot of integrations already built in. So it's much easier to integrate with whatever tools you're already using, whether that's your Google Suite, your Microsoft Suite, or things like Slack or WhatsApp or HubSpot. It's got pre-built integrations for all of these. You're also able to plug into all of the different LLM models. Even though I mainly use ChatGPT, through this, I can use Claude, Gemini, Grok, any of them. And sometimes it's good to be able to use different models for different applications. So that's a real advantage of using a product like this. Obviously, the ChatGPT agent builder that I mentioned earlier, one of the disadvantages of that is that it only works with the ChatGPT model. The other really helpful thing that you find within products like N8N is these templates. So you can see here, there's over 6,000 pre-built templates that other people have built. These are automations or agents to do common tasks that other people have built. And you can just take those, plug them in, integrate your own systems, and it's a much quicker way of getting these set up for a lot of the common tasks. So almost certainly someone's already built something very similar to what you're wanting to build, and that's probably a quicker way to get things done. Okay, so back to my presentation just briefly. I guess some of the key principles or best practices for building agents, if you're just getting into this space, it's best to give each agent one specific job rather than trying to have it too complicated. And the way this is heading is that you end up with multi-agent teams and each agent does a specific task. But the more specific the task can be, the easier it's going to be to automate that task. And really, I think the way to do it is to start simple. So start with the most basic task and then add to that as you go, because there is a lot of troubleshooting, but also testing and refining. This is not just build, set and forget. I think this is the kind of thing where you need to keep refining it, a bit like a staff member. You'll train them up, you'll give them the tools, but you need to be providing ongoing feedback to continually improve the output. And the same applies with agents. And then obviously safety is a big concern when you're building these. So definitely you want to be including the guardrails that I mentioned. And almost certainly to start with, you want to be having a human in the loop at some point rather than just setting them off to do their own thing. And it's important to have monitoring in place. Where are things heading? That's anyone's guess, but there's some obvious signs from the way things are going. And I think the next big step and where this will really become more mainstream is once that you can use natural language to build these agents. So rather than having to log in and do it all yourself, you'll soon be able to just say to ChatGPT or to Gemini, build me an agent, much like you can now vibe code programs by just telling it what you want. That's the way this is heading, that you'll be able to ask AI to build AI agents for you, and it'll be much more accessible at that point. As I mentioned, the future that we're looking at is really one made up of multi-agent teams. Much like a traditional org chart, you'll have org charts of agents. Maybe within your marketing team, there's a content agent writing emails. There's one doing social media posts. Maybe there's one doing market research, and you may even have a marketing manager agent on top of that. The organizations of the future will probably be made up of org charts of both agents and humans, which is pretty cool, but also quite weird concept to get your head around. The other thing that's really obvious the more I've looked into agents is that this really is going to be somewhat disruptive to SaaS programs, because basically everything that these SaaS tools are doing can now be done by an agent if you've got the time and resources to build it yourself. So whilst I think for a lot of big users, the all-encompassing products like Salesforce are still going to make sense, for a lot of smaller businesses where either you couldn't afford the full license or maybe you're just using one very specific task within it, it's going to be easier and quicker and cheaper just to build an agent to do what you need. So I think it will actually disrupt those SaaS products, and a lot of them may get replaced by agents. But at the same time, all of those SaaS products are now building agents into their offerings as well. So it's sort of disrupting from both ends. But I think it's really interesting that we can now, as small businesses, actually build our own agents for basically zero cost that can do a lot of these things that we used to have to pay expensive licenses to do. And the fourth point there in terms of where this is heading, as I say, it's still very much in that early adopter phase. There's still a lot more maturity. This is going to flesh out a bit more. Some of these tools that are available today probably won't exist in 6 months or 12 months. There might be new tools. And I think it's obvious that the big guys, so ChatGPT, Google, are going to start offering agent building capabilities themselves, which is probably going to threaten some of these specialist tools that have started doing this already. Like everything in AI, it's a very interesting and fast-moving space, but that's where it's at as of today, October 2025. Okay, so there's my quick overview of AI agents and automations, and also the example of the one I was able to build. Like I say, it did take a lot more work than I was expecting. When I tried vibe coding on a previous episode, within an hour using a tool I'd never used before, I was able to get a piece of software working, a web app working, whereas this took 4 or 5 hours to do a very basic workflow. So it is more involved than, say, vibe coding, where you're just using natural language. A lot of the time is spent integrating all your tools as well as troubleshooting. But this is just step one. I mean, you would get something like that up. You would then need to keep refining it, adding more features to it. So if you are a small business looking to do some automations and agents, you need to have someone either in your business or an external person, somewhat technical, whose job it is to build and manage these agents. Otherwise, you're just going to spend a lot of time and money and get something that doesn't quite do what you want, and then you won't use it again. So that's definitely something to be conscious of if you're just moving into this space, and particularly if you're a smaller business or a business owner. You probably don't have days of your own time to invest in learning these tools. Better to find someone who can, or just hold off for another 6 months, and it's going to be even easier 6 months from now. And the place to start is to start thinking about all your repetitive tasks, start documenting them. In last week's episode, I spoke about how to write SOPs. That's a really good first step, to just start writing SOPs for all of your repetitive processes, so that you're prepared in a few months when this is much easier. You can just feed those SOPs to AI and it'll build these agents for you. But there's no doubt that this is going to be part of our future. Probably whichever business you're in, there's going to be some involvement of agents down the track, either within your business, but certainly the businesses you're dealing with. So now's a good time to start getting your head around it, start learning some of the basics, and hopefully this episode has helped you on that journey. If you are finding this helpful, please follow the channel and leave the comments below. I love reading those comments, so let me know what you're learning, what your next challenge is in the AI space. And thank you for joining me on this journey to learn more about AI. I'm Scott Davison, and this is My Way or the AI Way.